Hi, I'm Tim Bedford, the Associate Principal for Research and Innovation at the University of Strathclyde in the heart of Glasgow, where COP26 is taking place, and I'm your host for today's event. It's really exciting to be in Glasgow with COP26 taking place. Last week, my university hosted the Conference of Youth. My office is in the Royal College building, 50 metres away from George Square, where Greta Thunberg spoke on a youth march last Friday. And on Saturday, we had hundreds of thousands of people marching through the street in front of my office. And as I speak, you may hear the swish of electric buses going past, taking delegates into the blue zone of COP. So I'm very delighted to welcome you to Glasgow for this conference, which is jointly organised by the University of Strathclyde with two networks that we're proud to be a member of, the International Sustainable Campus Network and CESAR, and also, of course, with our partners in Science Europe. This conference will be looking at how the research system can best respond to the challenges of net zero. And later on in the morning, we'll be launching a call to action, which reaches out to all participants in the research system and asks them to do their bit to ensure that the research system as a whole is doing the best it can to meet the challenges that we have. I'll be giving you more details about that at the end of session 2. Just on a technical point, throughout this meeting, you'll be able to use the chat function to put in questions that you would like to be asked to the panels. And please do that. We have a team of moderators who will pass those things back to the chair of the session. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Angelika Kalt, the director of the Swiss National Science Foundation, who will be chairing the rest of session 1. Over to you, Angelika.
Thank you very much. So a very warm welcome from my side to this first session on national and international research programs for zero net transition. So what we will be doing in this session is to discuss the perspectives of research performing and research funding organizations, what they can do in order to cope with the challenges for net zero transmission. And I guess that all of you have read what the most famous climate activist has said about the COP26 being a complete failure and a PR show and a global north greenwashing festival. So I guess with this meeting, we don't want to go into that direction because it is really important to have a critical view on what we have been doing up to now and to come up with really good plans of what we're going to do in the future. And for this, within this panel, we will focus on the lessons learned from the initiatives that we have already launched to tackle climate change and the challenges of net zero transition, and to base ourselves on this very critical review on what we have been doing up to now in order to extract the lessons learned that can be used in order to come up with proposals of how we can improve the design and the quality of our national and international initiatives and our collaboration on all levels. So what can we do better? And what should we do better and how should we do it? This is going to be a focus in the perspective of the research performers and funders in this panel. So what is available already are videos of our panelists who explain in these videos what their organizations have already been doing in this respect. And I would just like to briefly introduce the panelists to you. So we have Ángeles Gómez Borrego, who is the Vice President for International Affairs of the Spanish National Research Council. Welcome, Ángeles. We have Anne-Hélène Prieur-Richard, who is the head of the Department of Environment, Ecosystem, Biological Resources of the French National Research Agency, ANR. Welcome, Anne-Hélène. We have Marie Sundli Tveit, who is the CEO of the Research Council Norway. Welcome, Marie. And we have Sir Duncan Wingham, who is the Executive Chair of the Natural Environment Research Council of UK Research and Innovation, and also a member of the Executive Committee of UKRI. Welcome, Duncan. So now that you have met all of the panelists, I would just like to say a few words on how this panel is going to work. So first of all, there will be initial statements of the panelists, and they will take about 2 or 3 minutes. And I would like to ask you to stick to that time, please, so that we have enough time for discussion afterwards. And so these initial statements are already thought to wrap around a certain number of questions, 4 guiding questions that we will in any case discuss within this session. So the first one is, how did the programs that you have seen in the videos contribute to increase collaboration to tackle climate change and accelerate the green transition? So what worked, what did not work? And the second question is, how can funders really collaborate on an international level with truly international programs? The third question is, what was the role of science policy or of the interface between research and policy making in the design or in the implementation of these different programs that you explained in the videos? And the last question is probably the most important one. How do our systems have to change in order to enable us to tackle better the challenges of net zero transition and to have more collaboration on the international level and also on the national level? So with that, I will ask the panelists now to do their initial statements, and I will start with Angelis. Please, Angelis, you have the floor.
Hello, thank you, Angelica. My first words are of gratitude for being here today in this challenging meeting representing the Spanish National Research Council, CSIC. And secondly, I would like to make a clear and loud statement from CSIC on our commitment with the key areas of activities tackled in the call to action to research organizations for net zero transition. Some of these concrete activities are already implemented in our institution, and these are the samples I will briefly describe now. As a research public organization and the main agent in the Spanish system for science, technology and innovation, CSIC has deployed under the actual presidency an instrument to promote and support cross-disciplinary research, the so-called interdisciplinary thematic platforms, which are conceived as a collaborative framework based on the mission concept. This is with very specific deadlines and also with clear milestones. They bring together knowledge of CSIC expert groups with other institutions, including universities, public administration, private sector, and social agents. Up to 30 platforms has been launched up to date, and close to half of them are directly or indirectly related to global change, such as climate and climate services, flowback related with energy storage, agro-sustainability and biodiversity. I would like to mention Splast as a particularly success story with an ambitious cross-sectorial and symbiotic approach that involves material science and also biotechnology. In a joint action for the exploitation of new technologies and strategies to overcome the global challenge of sustainable plastics towards circular economy. Within this platform, CSIC has developed projects with the aim of replacing fossil material by transforming waste carbon dioxide from the bio-based industries into added chemicals, with good application in the chemical, cosmetic and plastic industries, and all with zero or negative greenhouse gas emissions. There is also an initiative to relaunch the development of carbon capture and storage technology in Spain, which could be of application in places with significant concentration of heavy carbon emitters, with processes which are difficult to decarbonize, such as steel industry, refineries, or cement. It is estimated that this hub and cluster strategy, having the emitters concentrated into hubs and clustered in specific solutions, could cut up to 68 million of tons of carbon dioxide per year, equivalent to 21% of the Spanish emissions. A strategy that could be adopted also in other countries in order to unlock one key technology for NetZero target. Interdisciplinarity is embedded in CSIC gens and transcends the thematic platforms, but we are doing a significant effort in connecting our multidisciplinary groups. In other words, CSIC is responding to the complexity of NetZero challenge by addressing them in an interdisciplinary way through collaboration across several disciplines, institutions, and society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelis. So I would like to come to the next statement, and I would like to ask Anne-Hélène to go forward with that.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you very much to the organizers for this invitation, and welcome to everyone in the audience. So I would say that the French National Research Agency has launched this year a new action plans for the coming 3 years, and as part of it, we have increased the number of cross-disciplinary themes. So out of 56 general themes, we have 19 dedicated to cross-disciplinary, and including transitions to net zero, energy transition, sustainability science, and so on. So that shows not only the willingness to address those hugely important societal challenges, but also that the French research community is structuring now, or is structured to respond to such research questions. As part of this new action plan, we also have a new programs aiming at strengthening interactions between science and society. And this is part of the new engagement of our government in terms of research reaching to society. However, this aspect does not include only communication aspects, and that is a good transition to my second point. Indeed, to foster research on net zero transition or sustainability issues, we think that communication is not enough to really align, in fact, stakeholder needs with academic research. We need to go one step further in terms of engagements of all stakeholders, so including decision makers, NGOs, private sectors, and to align those needs and to co-construct, in fact, research projects to ensure that the research outcomes will be efficiently used by the end users. So this is to respond, in fact, to this objective of strengthening those co-constructed research. We are engaged in specific calls, especially through the Belmont Forum, but not only, which aim at international collaborations and transdisciplinary collaboration on sustainability issue. And we also have an instruments which support the community to build those type of consortia to respond to collaborative international calls. And this is hugely important because we know that co-constructing a research project between academy and society is not an easy task. And this is really important to support as much as possible the community in doing that efficiently. And finally, I just would like to mention that we also have very large national investment for the future, which are directly driven by our governments to strengthen research in specific areas and to respond as well to national plans, political plans. And this is related to many issues, not only, but many issues related to net zero transition, climate transition of food systems, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne-Hélène. So the next statement is going to be by Marie. Marie, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to speak to you about funding partnerships in the framework of the Global Research Council. Last week, I had some very inspiring days at COP26. I got the chance to discuss both challenges and solutions to the climate crisis with people from a wide range of government agencies, organizations, businesses, and so forth. And I was convinced before, but I'm now more convinced than ever that we must prioritize research and development to solve this, and that we must work even closer than we have done with government agencies, organizations, and businesses. And to reach our climate goals and accelerate the green transition, we must ensure that climate research is made available and relevant to decision makers, as well as businesses and the wider public. And I'd like to highlight a couple of examples of projects that we have funded and that we believe could have a real impact, but also as ways of working. For example, the Norwegian Center for Energy Transition Strategies takes a system perspective on energy transition. And the researchers, they study the interplay between humans, technologies, stakeholders, industries, markets, policies, and the impacts of the energy transition on a wider societal change. And the study shows that although increased ability to meet human needs has been followed by reduced ability to protect the environment, some countries have found substantially better approaches to implement the transition. And these countries should serve as inspiration to others. And the researchers' findings show that public procurement can play a key role in increasing speed, and that plans for scaling should be included early in the innovation process to achieve acceleration. And researchers in another project studied differences in local adaptation approaches to natural disasters caused by climate change, like flooding, like landslides. And the focus was on the role of planning and learning networks to increase insights into how legal, financial, institutional instruments hinder or stimulate a local climate change adaptation. And the researchers gained new knowledge, and they made new models on how planning can be used as a mechanism to increase cross-sectoral and multi-level coordination of climate adaptation. And how we can join efforts between public and private actors. And we believe that both these projects can serve as examples, but they can also be important in their own self in fighting climate change. And international efforts, of course, are an integral part of all the Research Council's activities. Particularly of importance is the cooperation with EU research and innovation funds. And the Sustainable Development Goals pilot is an interesting new initiative as well. We've been one of the driving forces as an institution, scoping and preparing the call through the Global Research Council. And fair and equitable partnerships with developing countries is crucial in this to increase the likelihood of impact and implementation of results from research and to strengthen the research capacity on global challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie, for this statement. So the next statement is by Duncan. So Duncan, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words, and good morning to everybody who is joining us this morning. I thought that we chose well, the UK is presently spending, RI is presently spending of the order just a little bit less than $1 billion a year on research which is related to net zero. And it would be impossible actually to illustrate all of that. But I did pick a couple of examples which I felt were illustrative of important aspects of dealing with this question both nationally and internationally. One is an example of our food security program. That's a large program in the UK addressing what must be one of the top two crucial questions around net zero, which is how do we essentially rebase the global food system to allow us to continue to be fed at the same time as recognizing that we've got somehow to cut off its contribution in CO2 terms. And I think it's very illustrative of the fact that one needs first, really, before thinking internationally, one needs to organize nationally, and organizing domestically is often a bigger challenge in some ways than organizing internationally. But once you've done it, once you've brought together all the stakeholders on a national basis and a regional basis, you're in a very, very strong position to build outwards from there. And indeed, with the Global Food Security Program, I have then moved out to work with international apparatus, for example, about the Belmont Forum. And so I think that understanding how to bring together domestic stakeholders and international stakeholders is an important question for us. The second observation I think worth making is actually, if you say what we need to know zero, the truth of the matter is that most of it is already known. We can certainly get % of the way there without needing new knowledge. And what we recognize is we do have the technical capacity to do it. We do what we lack actually is rather more a system of governance that allows us to move with the pace that we need to. Now, the reason for making that remark is that I think that an important then question around international activity is what is its priority? It would be very easy, I think, to create a large number of small international initiatives, but one would wonder a while whether they're actually integrating up in a way that's really affecting our need to transition. So the question of what's a priority and why is it an international as opposed to a domestic priority, I think, is very important. The third point, I think, and this is also illustrative by the Global Food Security Program, I'm not claiming incidentally there's anything unique about that, one sees examples everywhere, but I think it's important to recognize that if we're to meet net zero, it will be the private sector that takes us there. It will be business that takes us there. And we almost mandatorily then have to think about how to ensure that we integrate in business into any future planning around our research, but even more innovation development, because without that partnership, we won't make it. So that would be my other strong priority around thinking about how we should evolve things into the future. And then finally, just a final remark around international collaboration itself. One could intellectually put d-climate by dt to zero and still want to see a great deal of international collaboration. And the purpose in making that observation is just then to say, what is it about net zero particularly that we need to focus on in the international research domain? What are the priorities for us in moving internationally? So I recognize entirely that I've been asking questions, not offering solutions, but in terms of setting out some initial thoughts for this discussion, I guess I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much, Duncan. Thank you very much to all of you for your statements, which have put forward a couple of ideas that we can now dig into by maybe starting out with the first question that we should deal with in this panel, which is, how did the programs that you just explained, or were talking about the cases that you made, how did they contribute to improve or incentivize collaboration. And by collaboration is meant within the academic domain, but also academic with non-academic domain, private-public partnerships, etc. And so I would like to ask you about these points. Maybe we start with the public first, the non-academic domain, not the private business sector. So what is your opinion?
Oh, I've lost you.
Well, can I start?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we may have lost the chair, so go ahead.
Okay, I think that, for example, these cooperation platforms we have put in place and we have established have allowed to align the research topics of many of the groups which were working already in CSIC, and this is about 600 groups are cooperating in these platforms from 80 centers. So it means that we have made stronger our contribution in some few lines, and in these aspects or in these topics, we are now ready to develop more ambitious projects. And we have already the companies, the industries joining together. So therefore, we are in a better position to develop more ambitious projects and to be more effective in fighting against the climate change, in whatever aspect you focus.
Okay, so your point is very much on to get all of the players together. And so what, if I may just ask the question again of how do you do it? Why does it work? And do you already see the first positive results of this?
Well, we are already, well, it works because we have joined, or we have been able to attract also the interest of companies which are co-financing in some way the platform, so the structure, and they are really committed with the work which is developed there. So this is on one side helping to go to meet the objectives. But on the other hand, we can go also to goals which are more ambitious, and we have together the companies in the team. So this allows us to be more effective in reaching the objectives.
Okay, thank you very much. Somebody else who wants to explain how it works to include really either the public or private-public partnerships or other stakeholders. I don't know, Marie, and then Anne-Hélène.
Yes, thank you very much. At the Research Council of Norway, we believe this is crucial to succeed, and we work actively to strengthen the collaboration between researchers and industry and the public sector and citizens. As I said earlier, I think this is, we're convinced that this is absolutely crucial to get everyone on board, working together for net zero and actually making that transition happen and fast. Having said that, and we could say a lot about alignment between the national and international strategies and programs, and that works very well. And I think that's some very interesting initiatives also that's very promising. But when we look at the mechanisms that we have nationally, we are absolutely looking at developing them further. We don't think that this is, I mean, it's a very these are extremely complex challenges that we are facing, and time is of the essence, and we need to get the acceleration into transition going. So finding new mechanisms also, maybe more missions-oriented.
I think we have lost Marie. So maybe in the meantime, Anne-Hélène, can you pick up and then we can come back to Marie. Maria,
Yeah.
you're back now?
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Okay, so can you just continue?
maybe the program didn't like what I said. I don't know. No, I was just going into the how we're working with new mechanisms, looking at how we can work even more missions-oriented, cross-sectoral, inter and transdisciplinary, bring in stakeholders, citizens on board, and working much more closely with government on different levels, and to accelerate that transition. And we've actually we've launched kind of parallel to thinking of the missions in the EU system. We've launched a Norwegian mission, or we are going to launch it. We have brought this forward, which is called Norway After the Oil and Gas Era, which is about reaching net zero in Norway, and how we're going to do this whilst creating many new jobs and securing welfare for the people in the future. So this is going to be a joint effort between all these different stakeholders and public and private actors. So this is something that we're bringing forward now. So I think it's fair to say that we have mechanisms. We have lots of promising projects out there. I described some of them, but we also need to look at new mechanisms within the battery of mechanisms that we have in the Research Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Marie. Now, Anne-Hélène, you wanted to say something on that point. How do you do it to include the stakeholders that you need to either define research programs in a good manner or to implement their results?
Yeah, so we have also several mechanisms, but for me, I think that one aspect is that we are able to fund the non-academic partners as well as the academic partners in a consortium. So I think that's a key point, because it's providing a place where they can find instruments over the years where they can rely on and come back. So I think that that's an important aspect, to have specific instruments calling upon, so through public-private partnerships, but also other kind of instrument, both at the national and international level, where they can come and know that they can build such a consortium. So that's one aspect which I think is important. And we have seen for some topics such as energy transition that 30% of the projects submitted to our generic call are with private sectors, in fact, in the consortium, so really building the research together. Having said that, I think that we should not forget that we are funding a continuum of research from disciplinary to strongly inter and transdisciplinary, and both of them are feeding each other. So I think it's important to keep that continuum supported and the research communities supported along all the continuum. And finally, I mentioned the interest of having those instruments over the years where communities can rely on, but we also have mechanisms to respond to rapid demand, in fact. So lately it was mostly about the COVID, but we also did that in terms of the earthquake in Haiti a few years ago, where we are able to mobilize very rapidly the communities to build that research call on the issue which is on the table with the different partners, and then to call upon the research community. And I think having also these research for action, rapid response type of call is really relevant to the urgent need that the society can come up with.
Okay, thank you very much. So this was about including external stakeholders, but one topic that came up in almost all of your statements was the interdisciplinarity, and I could go in further by saying transdisciplinarity. Now, the question is, how did your programs already enhance collaboration? And now my question is between researchers, between different research communities. You all were talking about kind of an equilibrium between bottom-up, long-term research and maybe then more mission-oriented programs. So my question is, how do you get the best researchers to really tackle the problems that we should tackle if we want to tackle the net zero transition? So how is that done in your organization to really stimulate researchers to contribute? I don't know, Duncan, can you make a statement about that?
Well, I was wondering about it. I mean, I'm not sure that I put it in those terms, because after all, what do you mean by the best researchers? What we need, of course, is a spectrum of capability which stretches from more or less from the more fundamental end all the way across to much more mission-driven activity. I think that the real challenge around net zero is, again, to understand what's the appropriate role of the science and innovation system, as opposed to all the other parts of government, or to put that another way around, how does it integrate best with all the other components of government to produce the outcome one wishes for? Certainly in the UK, and I don't suppose we are unusual, there is a political argument around net zero and the generation of new jobs and a new economy, as well as focus on those parts of the country which have not done well in what I might describe as the 20th century. And understanding what is the role of science innovation among all the other things that need to be brought together if you're to have success in that broad question of how to get a city to transition, how to get its economy to transition, how to make it better suited generally for the task that lies in front of us. That, I think, is a challenge for us. I don't think we've really presented, as a science community, been presented with that in quite the same way before. And certainly in the UK, that's the question domestically that we are focusing on, and don't feel I don't feel that we've got all the solutions in place either. So that really is a focus for us, certainly, as indeed it was. I heard repeating Norway's view as well, of course, because it's not particularly peculiar to the UK. I think the one other, you touched on the public, I think just one other comment I might make on the question of the public. I think science has been really effective in making everybody realize we should stop putting CO2 in the atmosphere. Where we've been less effective is communicating to the public at large what that means. What does it actually mean for people's ordinary lives to affect this transition? I don't think we've been as effective, anything like as effective, as we need to be in explaining to people how this transition has implications for them, what they should do. So there is quite generally another communication task for us in relation to the public if we're to be successful.
Okay, so you were kind of making this point before, I think also when you said, is new knowledge necessary? In some fields we have good knowledge from scientific research, and that comes back to the point that you say, which role does research then play among all of the other players? So would you think it would be one of the tasks of, for example, a research performing or a research funding organization also to invest into dissemination, uptake in a very large scale, larger than today? Anne-Helene was kind of making that point before when she said we also fund non-academic actors.
My answer to that is
go
rather
on if you want to, and then Marie.
Well,
yeah.
my answer to that is rather simple. It's yes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't see an argument that suggests that we should not be doing that, given this challenge.
Okay, so Marie, would you like to take up on that?
Yes, thank you very much. And also going a little bit back to the first part of your question or follow-up question, because I think we've already taken it further than just looking at interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, although these are very important dimensions to strengthen still. And we've developed the portfolio or the battery of mechanisms and instruments that we have to be very to include collaboration and include different sectors from the very beginning in the calls, whether it's collaboration projects that have this as criteria, other type platforms where we bring actors together across public, private, and so forth. So we do more and more of this. And it's also obviously about how we frame the calls around specific themes and the criteria that we assess the projects through. So we're looking at developing this, but we're already doing, we've made sure already to bring different actors together in the projects and in the platforms. We already fund almost half of our portfolio of projects at every given time include the private businesses. So that's already quite a lot. So we do a lot there. We have a lot of innovation projects in private businesses. We have also innovation projects in public agencies. When it comes to including citizens, I think we need to do a lot still, and so we're paving a bit way there. And looking at the interdisciplinarity, I think it's absolutely crucial that we bring these different perspectives together as well to get the dissemination going better and to have a faster uptake. And also looking at, and we've had a debate in Norway quite recently about the needs for those projects within maybe the social science sphere that actually go criticize the structures of power and so forth as maybe as a hindrance and enhancer of transition.
Okay, is there any comment from Ann-Helene or from Angeles to that point? So,
well, I would like to say that once you organize the calls on a mission-oriented topic, you have really already ensure the cooperation or the transdisciplinary cooperation, because you need to cover all the topics from the scientific development or scientific advance and knowledge to the implementation and deployment of the process or products, and also the social perception and the society implication in the topic. So it's when the calls are organized this way, it's very easy to ensure the cooperation between different actors.
okay, thank you very much. I'm just seeing a question in the chat, which is about how we need to change governance, but that's a question I would like to postpone to later when we come to how the system needs to change. I think that's a fairly important point in there, so please be patient. I'll take that up later. So maybe just one question in order to finish on that question, how was collaboration already enhanced by the things that are in place? Are there any really important drawbacks? Are there obstacles to your doings? And if yes, what are they? But very short. Yes, Ann-Helene.
So one response, I say one point is about international collaboration. So we can do a lot in terms of national domestic collaboration, and I think it's what we already do. But when we think about tackling some of those topics, we need to have research produced with and by everyone around the world, because we know that some of our actions in some places has consequences in others and vice versa. And one of our limitations that we find in some of our international collaboration, either European or international, such as the Belmont Forum, is the lack of funders able to fund researchers from and non-researchers from the Global South. And that, I think, is one aspect where we need to progress on. That's one of a major limitation I have experienced over the years. There are ways we are involved in some of the development aid agencies, for example, but the research part of development aid is still quite small, I would say, not meaning that the other part is sorry, not important at all, but I think that a lot could be done through research. You are building relationships, you are building trust, you are building understanding between people from different sectors, from different disciplines, but also from different countries. And that's something that can help also then in terms of taking actions, which is really relevant for everyone and not only for part of the community. So that's one major limitation I am seeing so far.
Okay, thank you very much. If nobody wants to comment on that topic, maybe we can come to the next important question, which is then, well, how can funders and maybe also research performers, how can they really collaborate? What does make sense? How do we have to collaborate in order to be better prepared, in order to launch initiatives that really make sense? So there are very many different ways to do it. There are large international organizations or bodies such as the Belmont Forum that was mentioned, the Global Research Council, the OECD Science Global Council, and so on. But there are also bilateral, trilateral, multilateral agreements between different funders or performers. There is the question of priorities. The field is huge. It's a global problem, but do we advance by having very general and more loose agreements between different organizations that cover many different things? Or do we go better ahead by launching very specific thematic and maybe sometimes also regional focus topics? So what is your, and Duncan was saying, okay, that you have to ask what really makes sense on the international level. You have to be well prepared on the national level before you can go to the international level. So what is your take on this? How should funders and maybe also research performers advance in this topic of international collaboration? What are your recipes? Don't know who wants. Duncan, would you like to say something on that? Or
well, I guess that, yeah, I'm happy to. I think that the issue for me is, again, I come back to this idea of if we put climate by dt to zero, so it's a mathematical metaphor, but what it means is if we imagine a world where there is no climate change, what is it about climate? And then we switch in, as it were, we turn a switch, switching climate change. My question is, what then is additionally demanded that wasn't demanded before? So first of all, internationally, of course, I mean, I'm sure this is true of everybody, but certainly in the UK, more than half the papers that are published from our funding have international authors on them, non-UK authors. So essentially, the majority of the science we pursue anyway is international. We all know that, but it's worth saying because it's not as if we are somehow all in national little boxes. It's not how science works. I think the next thing that's obviously important is open access, but certainly in Europe, we're moving very strongly in that direction. And one hopes that that may widen out so that there's open transmission of the research in some ways is more important than the researchers themselves getting together. I think that for me, I'm not convinced that we need special mechanisms around net zero over and above other issues that we could name. Very interesting to see what happened, for example, with COVID and how parts of the scientific system responded very quickly to the need to transfer information around because of that challenge. For me, I think the question is more about understanding what is it, what are the things where it becomes very important for us to collaborate, not necessarily globally, but certainly regionally. Earlier, for example, someone was mentioning foundation industries, let's say industries with very high energy requirements, glass, cement, steel. That probably is a subject which, for example, certainly in Europe, we could easily think about collaborating on. On the other hand, if we look at a number of land surface problems, they're quite distinct. And the issues, for example, of achieving net zero in areas producing cotton are very, very different from those that might affect, for example, meat-driven production in the UK. So I think this is about trying to understand better where we would like to see collaboration, and then ask ourselves whether we actually need more mechanisms. I'm not convinced we do, but if we needed them, we could easily create them. I think it's more about understanding what it is that we can best do internationally.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. I think there was Marie and then Helen. Anne-Hélène, excuse me. Or
Yes,
Marie.
thank you very much. Yeah, I think to your question, I think we have lots of examples that to a large degree we already do this and it works and it's inspiring. And the collaboration that we have in Horizon Europe, in the Development Forum, and through the GRC SDG pilot, they're all good examples. And there are many others. We have the Aeronets, we have the JPIs, we have partnerships, bilateral initiatives, and so forth. I think key to success has been aligning strategies and making it all sort of strategically linked together. What we see is that there are still considerable challenges with regard to funding researchers and stakeholders in the global south. Through the portfolio that we have, Global Development and International Relations, we aim to foster this cooperation across the Norwegian research community, as well as promoting international collaboration with research institutions and NGOs and governments in that countries or low and middle income countries. And a very important dimension in this, obviously, is fair and equitable partnerships with developing countries, and so that we increase the likelihood of impact and implementation of results from research, and to strengthen the research capacity on global challenges. So this is something that we are aiming for. And in line with the government's EU policy, we also have a strong emphasis on encouraging and enabling Norwegian researchers to participate in the EU Framework Programme for Research and Innovation. So we try to align all these different strategies. When it comes to the SDG pilot, I can also mention that we have more than 10 countries now, and several of them are African, and South Africa has the lead, as you already know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anne-Hélène?
And just wanted to follow up on one thing that Duncan said about agreeing on priorities, maybe more important than building new initiatives. And I think that one type of activities we are not always able to fund as a funding agency, but I think we do that as part of, for example, the GPIs is about activities regarding alignment of strategies and priorities among countries participating in a GPI or in the Development Forum or other kind of initiatives, as well as activities around impact of research. And I think that quite often we do not include that as part of the research goal. It's something in addition, not everyone can participate and so on, but I think that this is really important if we want to go further in terms of collaboration to ensure that here again we have some common understanding, even if after all we have some specificity between the different countries, but at least to have many issues have a common ground to all of us. And looking at what the research has produced and publicized in a way, that's also important to see how we should adapt the type of research we are, not the type of research we are funding, but how to adapt, how mechanisms to respond to the needs and to both the needs of the research communities and the end users. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Angeles, would you like also to make a statement on this point?
Yeah, I would like to mention that from the point of view of research performing organizations, we really welcome the agreement and the efforts you do as funders of so creating joint programs and allowing multi-country projects to be funded with your funds. I think this is important. This is what we do at European level, but it is also important that is implemented from the national agencies and allow the international cooperation in these programs. And I think also that, for example, European Union has so regional programs such as SUDOE or LIFE programs, which can be focused on different aspects and promote cooperation and implementation of actions. And this include also countries which are outside the European Union, and but are important for exporting or implementing the solutions we can find.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So let me tackle the question from another side, maybe. So in your view, what should be the role of organizations such as the Global Research Council or the Global Science Forum in trying to enhance and to foster international collaboration where it is necessary, where it presents an added value? So what is the role of these organizations? Is it big? Should it be bigger? Should we rely more on the initiatives of every funder or research performers? What is your view on that? What should be the role of these organizations? I don't know who wants to start.
I mean, I guess that this is to some extent, this is a political question, and the issue hinges, I think, on the degree to which you feel that you need an increase in what I might describe as international governance, scientific governance, at the cost, inevitable cost, actually, of weakening of the domestic governance. Now, I don't know. I suspect that UK is not unusual in that science funding generally from government is heavily focused on domestic priorities, and I think therefore that it is quite difficult to think from a UK perspective anyway. It's quite difficult to think of increasing the weight of international funding frameworks significantly, because I can see that this would create domestic tensions, which would then be quite difficult to deal with. But I think the way I think of it is rather the other way round, which is these bodies exist and actually are there to provide mechanisms to create where international agreement can, as it were, break out. There's mechanisms there to do it. And I would say, therefore, that it comes back for me. The key question is, for me, what is it one wants to see pursued internationally? Because then those mechanisms provide a framework for us to do so. It's not. I don't know that I'd be strongly supportive of increasing what I might roughly describe as authority, but I do think that we could use them more as a place where we could thrash out priorities in a way that we don't really today.
Okay, thank you very much. This may be Marie. Do you want to answer to this one? After that, we have two questions from the audience. Yes, Marie.
Right, just a very short comment. I think that these international organizations will have a very strong role to play, and I think that when we go beyond Horizon Europe, beyond the European Research and Innovation programs, we need more than bilateral agreements. We need some platforms that can bring it together. And I think the SDG pilot that we have now in GRC is a good example of how we can move this forward.
Mm-hmm. So there's one question from the audience that asks one of the panelists to briefly elaborate on the actions that the Belmont Forum carries out and what the lessons learned are from the Belmont Forum. Is somebody wants to answer that one? Anne-Hélène or Marie, or who's involved?
Yeah, I can start. I think that what has allowed the Belmont Forum was first to be something which is quite with a loose organization in terms of administration and so on. So the idea was that you come, the agencies who are interested in a topic agree on the priorities, on the way to conduct a collaborative research call, but there is it's really open and on a voluntary base. So there is quite a lot of flexibility. And this is something which is important when you bring agencies or funders which have very different mandates or with different possibilities of funding, etc. So this flexibility is very welcoming in a way. The other thing which I think was key in the development of this type of research was that there is mainly two things which are mandatory. The first one is that it needs to be transboundary, so you need to have at least 3 countries in a consortium to be funded. And the other aspect is the inter- and transdisciplinarity. It means that in the consortium you need to have partners with a background from natural sciences and social and humanities sciences, as well as what we call stakeholder at large. And I think that sometimes the community needs to be pushed a little bit. So the fact that this is mandatory in the projects allows to build those connections or to think more about how to build those connections. So I think that has been also something very successful for the last 10 years in structuring the community and in learning how to do it, because we still don't know sometimes how to do it, but it's done by learning by doing it. So I think those two
Okay,
aspects.
so the question about the lessons learned from the Belmont Forum is you were talking about the large degree of freedom that the participants had to bring along their own ideas, projects, and so on. So in your view, that is an element that is very important.
Yeah, indeed.
That it's not too much top down.
Yeah, not too much. Yeah, it's really a discussions between the research communities and the funding agencies. And I think that's an important point in the process.
Okay. Somebody has another view on the Belmont Forum? No. So the next question in the chat is also related to our last question, which is about systems. So I would like to touch upon it, but take it up again, which is about if the panel thinks that the requirements for the research system to respond and adapt rapidly to the COVID, can we learn or deduce from that it is now also better able to respond to the climate crisis? So what is your view on that? Do you think if we look at, if we understand research system as something at very large, which encompasses also the international collaboration, international bodies and so on. So who would like to comment on that? Duncan?
I'm happy to start. If you,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things I think to say about this. First of all, that what happened under COVID, one needs to recognize occurred in the face of something that everybody agreed was an absolute priority. And that had a transforming effect on the ability to move quickly. Certainly in the UK, we moved very quickly, and we moved large sums of money, actually large sums of funding at risk, because we were able not only ourselves to do that, but we also had reviewers who were prepared to drop everything. And so there was a real sense of a single national priority. Now, as soon as that sense goes away, you cannot get the same kind of speed of response, and so that just needs to be recognised. If you want to respond in a COVID fashion, you can do it, but you need a sense of shared single priority to get that to happen. I think the other comment I'd make is that one needs to recognize that the COVID challenge, after all, is simple in the sense that the nature of the enemy is clear. And to a great extent, so is the nature of the weaponry. If you look at environmental sciences where we've had success with environmental pollutants, so for example, Freon in the ozone layer, acid rain, it's because the nature of the enemy has been pretty simple. It's been easy to identify, and it's been easy to identify weaponry. I think the great challenge of net zero is that the nature of the problem is not simple, and it's hugely diffuse. There's almost no part of our lives which are not somehow or another generating CO2. And I would just slightly caution against an oversimple move of that happened with COVID, so we can do it with climate. I think you've got to recognize that climate is really a difficult enemy because it's so widespread through everything we do. So that's my quick response to the COVID question.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. Marie, would you like to follow up on that?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I mean, it's absolutely right what's being said, that that the climate crisis is not a simple enemy to tackle, and it's far more complex than the enemy that we have been facing with COVID. Although that is also, I mean, facing it through vaccination is actually quite, when you think about it, is actually quite complex in all the agencies that needs to be involved in that, both nationally and locally and internationally as well. We're facing a wicked problem with the climate crisis, and it links to almost everything. However, I think there are lots of lessons to learn from the COVID crisis, and more than anything on how we were able to sort of pull all the actors together and have them work at the right time in the right way. Everything from researchers that have been working with sort of basic and groundbreaking researches for years, linking them with all different actors that actually bring this to a commercially available vaccine, and then the whole rollout of actually vaccinating people with all, and you have everything from funding to legislation to all the different authorities from locally to internationally joining forces to do this in the right way. So I think that there must be lessons to learn from that, surely, and we're trying to take that with us into that new mission that I mentioned initially, which is about reaching net zero in Norway, and how we can do that in the transformation of the Norwegian economy. That's going to be fundamental, because we're now so heavily dependent on oil and gas that we have a bigger challenge with this nationally than I think very many other countries have, because the energy transition in itself is going to be so, well, that is very huge. But the need to diversify the economy is absolutely, almost breathtaking at the moment. So we need to get going, really.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking a bit at time, and I would like to very briefly turn to the third question, which is about the role of science policy and the interface between research and policy making. And only very shortly, because you already touched upon it in the first part and you all attributed a very high importance to it. But I would like to ask about funds in this respect. So what is your experience as research funding or performing organizations? Is there a strong will to invest additional funds for research and innovation programs that tackle the net zero transition or tackle climate change in a very general sense? or as, for example, a national funding agency or a national performer, you have to cope with the problem that you're told that your funds should rather be earmarked for these questions instead of having additional funds. So maybe very briefly, is that a problem or is that no problem? Are governments aligned for this purpose or not with funders? Yes, Marie?
I think when it comes to working with the strategies in-house in the Research Council, we are very much sort of reorganizing our forces to face this. So internally, I think we're on the right path. When it comes to whether or not the Norwegian government will put enough resources into this, I think we're actually, we have a new government as of this fall, and they're actually presenting their national budget as we speak. They started at noon, so we'll see. But I really do hope so, because there will be no transformation towards net zero without increased funds for research and innovation in this country.
Okay, Angeles, would you like to state something on this question? How does the situation look in Spain?
Yes, we have this. Indeed, the question of communicating with stakeholders and policy making is worrying us. And we have talked about and we have included this in our strategic plan for the next 4 years. But we think it's a quite complex exchange, and it depends a lot if you are talking about local, regional, national, or European policies, and then therefore it's very difficult to really make a single approach. But it is something that worries us, to make our messages so clear enough and simple enough for the politicians to be aware and be able to implement them.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else on the panel want to state on this relation to policymakers or also the problem of funds? Duncan, you're on mute, I think. At least I can't hear you. I don't know about the others. Okay, so can some technical support be provided for Duncan, and we take Anne-Hélène in the meantime?
Yeah, I can make quite short. I think that some of the funding for research is still, not only funding for research, but also for the operationalization of solutions that may have been designed through research, is still sectoral in many places. And so we have, as Duncan was mentioning, it's a complex topic, net zero and climate, and we need to go in different directions, and having some system to have more synergies, looking more at synergies and bringing the sectors together would increase efficiency in a way. So that's one aspect where we may need also some mechanisms to ensure the linkages between the different pieces, and to look at question in a more systematic and system view.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, we'll go to the next question, if that is okay for you. So it's the question about the system. Is the research system, and this is a very general term, is it set up in the right way, or how does it need to change in order to be able to better foster collaboration between science communities, between academics, non-academics, etc. So, and all that in the perspective of engaging more for our net zero transmission and tackling climate change. So, my question is, what do you think about the governance? This was also a question in the chat. Is the governance nationally and internationally set up in the right way? Does it foster these kinds of collaborations or not? It's a very general and difficult question.
Can you hear me or not?
Yeah, now we can hear you, Duncan.
Yeah. So let me just take a start on this very complicated question, I guess. I mean, first of all, one could say, if we have a governance change around net zero, would it be the governance of the scientific system that you'd immediately come to mind? At least in my mind, the answer to that question is pretty obvious, and it's no. And there are all sorts of governance. There's all sorts of inadequacies in the international governance frameworks, which are why we are where we are. And in spite of however many years it is of IPCC, if you look at the CO2 curve, it just keeps going up. So I think that, first of all, if you're going to focus on governance, I'm not sure that scientific governance would be at the top of my list. That's the first observation I've made. But the second, and don't confuse them. I think it's possible to get rather precious about the contribution of research innovation. Actually, I think there are other parts of the totality of the net zero solution one may need to think about first. What I would say, though, is I come back to something we mentioned earlier, and it is related again to the complexity of the problem, but also recognizing the number of different parties that one needs to engage in if one's going to have success, particularly in terms of business success, which is in turn closely related to the question of just economic impacts, because without economic rejuvenation, it's difficult to see how you're going to achieve that. So these are very tightly coupled questions. And now, as we said earlier, we are challenging ourselves, and we are challenged by not really, I don't think at this point, understanding how best to connect what we do with all the other actors that need to be brought together in society to achieve that transition. So I would say, yes, there is a governance deficit there. And I don't know that anybody has an immediate simple answer to that question, but I'm of the view that we probably need one.
Okay, who has got views on that point? Marie?
Yeah, I think that in general terms, I mean, science communities must work together to address these sustainability challenges and bring solutions to them. So the system, I think we need to work more with the system, and that we need to join forces between the funding agencies to enable international teams to a larger extent than what we do now, also outside the European realm. And there are obstacles today to such funding mechanisms. Some countries are not able to fund outside their borders. Others have very strict rules. I think the Global Research Council could take a role in increasing international funding opportunities by setting up rules for international cooperation, and also by initiating and running international funding schemes like the ones I've mentioned before. And there are there are very strict rules for some countries to fund low and middle income countries through national and international calls. So I think this is something that we could look into and join forces to lower these barriers.
Okay, anybody else who's got a view on this topic? Angeles and then Anne-Helene?
It could be good, I think, from the point of view of the researcher, to have a specific or a clear recognition of this collaboration. No? This would help to promote and improve the attractiveness of this cooperation.
Okay, thank you. Anne-Helene?
I would like to bring a different topic in a way, and that's maybe the topic of the next roundtable about the education for higher education level. we have talked about the need to go across sectors, across disciplines, and so on. And I think key aspects in the training of the future researchers is this capacity to build bridges and to also really understand these complex issues of net transition, but more generally speaking about sustainability. And if we could include in all the curriculum a basic understanding on what is sustainability, what kind of issue are behind, and so on, that could provide a general understanding and maybe later on create the capacity for people to come together and work together and see why the field of chemistry or the field of engineering or the field of literature can bring something to those issues. So I think that's maybe an aspect. So it's not really on the research system itself, but I think it's to prepare the research system of the future.
Well, I wouldn't really say that, because we were talking about governance before. That's one aspect of the research system, but I wanted to.
We lost you. And
we lost you. Yeah, back.
I wanted to. Part of the research system is also about the research culture in a certain sense, and that is something that you were touching upon. But I would like to ask you if you think that the current rewards and incentive systems that we have in the research system, in a very large sense, is it set up to foster these kinds of collaborations? That's the question we should answer. How should our systems change in order to allow more for this collaboration on that topic? A more efficient one. So do you think that is an obstacle, the current system that we have, or how should it be changed?
I think I would think that it's one of the barriers that we have in terms of rewarding the scientists to cross borders and so on. Also in the publication system, we know that we need to have peer-reviewed literature and so on, and that's hugely important, but also providing more and more reward to the researchers who also publish in other type of literature, I think is good. So there has been a lot of advances recently. If we look at that, for example, the Intergovernmental Panel for IBES, the Intergovernmental Platform, for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, they are using some great literature. In addition, they have worked a lot on integrating indigenous knowledge and local knowledge. So all these kind of advances, I think, have already shown some successes, but could be reinforced in the near future to allow, to strengthen, in fact, our capacity to respond to those research questions.
Okay.
Indeed.
Anybody else would like to say something on our rewards and incentive systems? Okay, so then maybe, yes, go ahead, Angeles.
Well, I think that really there is an ongoing discussion on these topics worldwide right now on how we should establish the incentives and how we should evaluate the quality of research, and yes, to take into account the relevance and importance of cooperation and collaboration with other countries. Researchers from different countries could be an incentive, clear.
Okay, thank you. So I think it may be time to turn to a question from the chat, which I can't see anymore because my chat is empty. But I think it was a question in the sense of, how do we know that with our doings we're going in the right direction? That's a tricky one. Who would like to try on that one?
That's a very good question. And indeed, it's one that I've been raising in the context of the UK. So my question is, well,
Oh, Duncan. Oh, we can't hear you. You're kind of frozen in. Can that get fixed, please? Well, it doesn't work as fast as it should. So does somebody else want to contribute to answering that tricky question? Oh no, he's back again. Duncan, are you back?
Yes, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you again. So, but I think you should repeat what you said before because it wasn't audible.
So I actually got distracted. What was the question?
The question was how do we know with all of our doings that we're going in the right direction? And you said you had already brought that question up in the UK.
So because my question is, how would you know? And this points to something that's really rather surprising, which is well, maybe it is or maybe it isn't, that actually our emissions aren't measured. They're all estimated everywhere in the world. So first of all, speaking as a physicist, I would actually like us to place some priority on actually measuring what we're doing rather than relying on claims. I don't think, for example, we really know how much CO2 is coming out of our land waste, for example. But I also think that we lack a wide range of what I might describe as metrics, which aren't just about CO2, but about understanding what the social impact of making the transition is, and how do we know whether a transition is just or not? How do we measure that? How do we understand it? So I personally think there's a great big space there for any budding scientist who's interested. There's quite a lot can be done to help us down the road of actually evaluating whether all this activity is achieving what we need it to achieve.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. Who would like to continue or follow up on that? Difficult question. Yes, Marie?
And it's a great question, and it's really difficult, but still necessary to answer. And I think we need to answer it on a range of different levels. One is knowing that the policies that you're implementing actually have the effects that you want them to have. We can have research into that. Another one is inside the funding agencies, obviously. Are the measures that we're taking, the activities that we're doing, is it leading to the delta that we want, the change that we want? In fact, starting by saying, which change is it that we want? When we come to the end of this strategic period, what is the difference that we've made, and how are we measuring that, and how do we keep track of whether or not we're going there? I think that's. I think every funding agency needs to make sure to answer that question, because I think we're quite prone to be measuring the activities that we do rather than the effect that we have.
Yes. Other statements on that topic? Do you have experiences in measuring what you are doing, about the efficiency of your measures?
Is that for me?
No, it's in general for everybody, because you said it was on different levels, and as funding or performing organization, you can already take measures on your own doings. What Duncan said afterwards is the outcomes of the projects and so on. But to know whether you as an agency are going in the right direction would also require to have some sort of an evaluation or measurement of your doings. To what has that led?
Absolutely. So we're developing now our whole system for analysis and the way that we measure different things. And we want to move much further in the direction of, let's say, fund and follow rather than fund and forget. So to put it a little bit bluntly, and that is, to understand the actual effects that our investments have out there in the landscape. And I think that way of thinking we need much more, not only in the funding agencies, but also elsewhere and in politics, policies, and so forth.
Okay, thank you very much.
I sometimes remark that the best strategies are retrospective, and what I mean by that is if we look at where we have had success in the environment. around Freon, where we've had success around acid rain. The case that science has made a very strong case that it was crucial to contributing to those outcomes, just as is the case with COVID. And I'm less concerned about what I might describe as the business of agencies having to show that they're making a difference. I'm more concerned that we can get to a stage where science can really demonstrate that it's had a similar effect in the CO2 domain as it had in those other environmental challenges. And I think if it can do that, really show, first of all, we really show that we can measure the changes that we are achieving, that we really are turning the CO2 curve downwards, and we can demonstrate that that science is really crucial to doing that, and that's the outcome that we would like to see. And at the moment, even if we were achieving this, we wouldn't be able to measure that outcome. And for me, that would be the highest priority here.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think we're just in time. And I would like to thank all of the panelists for their contributions. It wasn't an easy discussion. The questions were difficult, they were very broad. So thank you very much, and we'll try to really extract the essential of it for session number 3. And with that, I would like to invite Tim Bedford to come back on stage and pass the word to him.
So thank you very much, Angelica. That was a really interesting session. And as you say, you're really going to have your work cut out in summarizing all those many key points that were made by our colleagues, by our speakers. But we'll welcome you back to the final session to be able to give us that overview, and that will really contribute to the debate we're going to have. So to everybody watching this, this discussion, we're now going to take a break. We're back on with session number 2 at the top of the hour. And during this break, we're going to be showing you a number of videos which have been produced by some of the universities, which are of the speakers that you'll see in session 2. So we welcome you back in half an hour. Thank you very much.